It's the Self-Defense Report podcast with Jim Bunker and Phil Elmore.
Hey folks, and welcome to the Self-Defense Report podcast. My name is Jim Bunker and I'm your host. With me is my co-host, Phil Elmore. Say hello, Phil Elmore.
Hello, Phil Elmore.
So tonight in the Self-Defense Report, we're going to be talking about why we're here and why we chose to do this and who we are. So thanks for joining us, and we appreciate your patronage. If you're not already subscribed to our channel on iTunes, please do that. If you're on YouTube, do me a favor and give me a thumbs up. And if you want to subscribe so you don't miss any exciting new episodes with good information about self-defense, feel free to do that as well. You can also find us on Facebook at our group, which is the Self-Defense Report podcast group on Facebook. So look for Self-Defense Report.
Until they ban us. Because, social media.
Absolutely.
Well, I'll go first, Jim, by asking you who you are. Who are you?
Thanks for that, Phil. So, folks, my name's Jim Bunker, and I spent the last almost 20 years in law enforcement in my home state, worked for a large metropolitan police department where I rose to the rank of sergeant, and honestly got out and left because of how bad things were getting in society and how unsafe it was for our law enforcement officers. So I know there's a lot of people out there that see that, and you see lots of posts where people comment on it. There's some trends lately where there's some preliminary studies that are showing it's harder to find guys that want to be cops and girls that want to be cops. Yeah, it is. And it's harder for people that want to stay in it as a career because we haven't had a whole lot of support. Now, that's changed as of the last couple of years, but, it has been really hard for your local law enforcement officers across the board. So for all the guys and girls out there still doing the job, I salute you and I give you all the respect in the world. Prior to being a active full-time police officer, I was a U.S. Marine, and there was a short period of time in between those where I was in the private sector where I provided security for, businesses, and I did a little dignitary protection work as well. So if I look back on this time, for just about the last 28 years, I've been carrying a gun for either our country or for our community in one form or another. And the reason I'm doing the self-defense report is because I've just seen a lot of negative things in the last couple of years. Actually, the last 20 years, I've seen a lot of negative things. And I'd like to pass on some of that knowledge to private citizens out there that may not really have a good handle on this. We'll talk about this a little bit later in the podcast. I don't want to take up all of Phil's time to introduce himself. But the reason I'm here is because I've just seen so much injustice toward the private citizen, and it's really sad. And I want to make a difference. I got into law enforcement and the military because I wanted to serve, and now this is going to be one of my outlets to keep doing that. So, Phil, let me ask you this. Who are you exactly? And tell me, I know you're one of two constants on the internet. Tell me about how you and I met, and tell the listeners and viewers, why you're a part of this team.
Well, I've been writing about self-defense and self-defense issues for the last couple of decades. Back in the old dial-up days when I started my first website, which was like the free website that they give you with the service provider's account, and I started writing about martial arts and ranking and rating websites, and eventually started writing my first articles about self-defense and self-defense issues. Over the years, I became embroiled in a number of different disputes online, and that's how people first started to get to know who I was. And then one day, I called Paladin Press in order to order a book that I had written an essay in. And I said, yeah, I'm one of your authors in part. My name is Phil Elmore. And the person on the other end of the phone said, and you're the publisher of The Martialist, which is my self-defense website. And at that moment was when I knew that something interesting had happened, that a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy had occurred, and I was now a self-defense author because I started authoring about self-defense. And, over the years, I found the time to actually get the training and work with people. And I've spent, I don't know how many hours interviewing subject matter experts. I do freelance writing. I do ghost writing. I guarantee that you've read something I've written, even though it might not have had my name on it. And along the way, I even found time to write some books that did have my names on them, a few of which got made fun of in grand style. My books have been made fun of by Chris Hardwick on At Midnight on Comedy Central and on Break.com and in a variety of other venues. It's one of the ironies of life that I thought I was going to get famous writing martial arts books, and instead my best-selling book is a book on CPAP machines. So that's life saying, you want success, you can have success, just not how you thought you would. But over the years, I have never stopped writing about self-defense. I've written for all kinds of magazines. I've written any number of books and newsletters, and I every month I write for various clients, ghostwriting self-defense newsletters, and I even still find time to get out and do a seminar now and then. And self-defense is something that I believe is everybody's right. It's something I'm very passionate about. It goes back to when I was a very young man. And I observed the fact that sometimes people get pushed around or threatened or endangered, and those people ought to be able to defend themselves. And I also believe that any plan that starts with step 1, become a professional athlete, is not a viable plan because it doesn't work for a good deal of the population. And, at the end of the day, self-defense is not about who's tougher. It's about who gets to go home and be okay. And everything else is secondary. So that's why I do this. And that's why I've been doing this for a lot of years. So those of you watching or listening, that's how Jim and I met. He was yet another in a long string of clients who I met online and tried my best to sell things to. And that's how we ended up working together.
Yeah, and Phil, let me just take it from there. I'll tell you this, folks. One of the reasons that Phil and I, started this venture is because we both have a passion. Now, I'll tell you this, Phil and I don't agree on every subject. And I don't want it that way. I want to hear the discord. So do me a favor, if you're on our Facebook page, if you're on our YouTube page, and you feel like you want to have some discourse with me or with Phil, that's fine. Keep it polite. Don't use a bunch of profanity and do anything that's going to get you blocked from either one of those pages. But just understand, what we're trying to pass on is knowledge that we've got over the years. And I sought Phil out to work with him because I had read so much of his work over the years. Years ago, Phil and I were in various forums together well before Facebook was ever a thing. And we would, impart knowledge, to each other, him much more than me because he's a writer. But this is really where I excel, the ability to communicate information verbally and to instruct. And over the years of being an instructor, from everything from hands-on use of force all the way through firearms, I found that one of the biggest problems is there was this linchpin that was missing in the system. Obviously, the old saying that a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. Well, I felt like it was broken. And let me tell you why. Because law enforcement officers will do anything they can to stop crimes. They are some of the most dedicated individuals you'll ever see. And I won't take anything away from EMS or firefighters. They're fantastic people as well. But one of the most heartbreaking things for a law enforcement officer is when they can't be there. And unfortunately, folks, they can't. You will see, and if you look at stats across the board, police officers cannot be there to protect you. And again, there was actually a court ruling that said it's not the job of law enforcement to protect, society. I don't think there's any person that goes out and puts on that badge that does not want to be there for you and for your family to stop a violent crime. And that's one of the things that really causes a lot of issues for law enforcement officers, is that they want to be there and they just can't. They find themselves being report writers and getting there secondary to it. So a lot of what we're going to focus on the Self-Defense Report podcast is all about how can you survive on your own? How can you be your own ability to rescue yourself and your family? And one of the best ways to do that is never be in the fight, never be a victim of crime. And if you are ever in a situation where someone targets you, how to be a survivor and not a victim. So, Phil, back to you.
There's not much I can disagree with there, although obviously we've had our disagreements in the past. But I think the overriding lesson has got to be everyone can defend themselves. And I hear so often from people, I get these emails, yeah, I can't take such and such martial art. I can't do this. I can't do that. I've got this limitation. I've got a mobility restriction. I'm old. I can't train in XYZ. I have place restriction here, whatever it is. There's always a way. I remember in one of Chuck Norris's, I think he's written like 12 or 13 biographies at this point. But in one of his biographies, Chuck Norris wrote about a student who came in and said, he was in a wheelchair, I think. And he's like, well, I can't do these kicks you're doing because, my legs don't work. And Chuck Norris was like, okay, don't do that. Find another way. And I have a friend who went to take a specific martial art from a specific instructor, and that guy told him, well, no, I can't help you because my friend had a very specific mobility issue involving one of his arms. And the instructor was like, no, you can't do this. And I'm like, that's not what you do. You find a way to modify what you do and you make it work.
Right.
So I'm personally offended by the idea that anyone would tell someone else, you just can't. Because what you're telling somebody, if you tell them they just can't, where the topic is self-defense, you're telling them that their life is not valuable. And I reject that idea.
Right.
And I always have.
Right. Right.
So that's where I come at this from.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this, Phil. When we think about lessons that we've learned, I know there's a ton of them, but if there was one of them that you had to tell civilians that you learned throughout your time of writing and taking martial arts and just being in that crowd, what's the number one lesson that you would want to impart to them?
That lesson would be, you can always find a way, even if it's not obvious. There's always a solution. I know it's a nerd reference, but I always think of in Star Trek II, where Captain Kirk admits that he doesn't believe it's not possible to face a no-win situation, that he doesn't believe in losing. You can always find a way. And as silly as the reference is, the concept is valid.
I don't think that's a silly reference at all. I mean, I would refer back to people like Richard Marcinko, who was the Navy SEAL that started SEAL Team 6, and he did not believe in conventional warfare. And if there's one thing that I would tell the average everyday citizen, is that as a police officer, I have seen people that have lived, and I have seen people that have died because of one decision that they either made or failed to make. And the decision could be as little as cross the street. Don't be where you are right now because you can see that trouble coming. Therefore, get off of that corner of the street. So I would tell Joe Citizen and Jane Citizen, you have a plan for everything else but self-defense. Does that make any sense? None whatsoever. We have a plan for what happens if our kids' school sets on fire, and we have drills, and we have all these things to do to get our kids out of a school if there's a fire. And the last child killed in a school fire was like 1929. We have fire retardant chairs that you can hold a Bic lighter to for 5 minutes and it won't catch on fire. Why? Because the fire marshal guy, we're really big on him. We want to make sure there's no fires. But we can't put an armed police officer standing at the front of your kid's school to keep them alive. Bad guys target weakness. And if there's one thing that they fear, because they don't respect very much, but the one thing that they fear is that you're going to fight back and you're going to have a chance to hurt them. And if you have strength in your corner, and it could be as little as this, lock your doors, have lights that come on at night and go off in the morning, dusk to dawn lights. Have effective means of protecting yourself in your home. I don't know what that looks like for you. Maybe you live in an area where you can't own guns. Maybe you're a felon and you can't own guns. That doesn't mean you can't protect yourself. That doesn't mean somehow, because you've made a mistake in your life that, that caveat of you having self-defense goes away. It doesn't. So what I want people to know is you need to have a plan. Think about it this way. You don't leave the house with your 2 kids to get in your car without making sure they have a headset for whatever media they're listening to. They got snacks, they got juice boxes, they got all. Have you thought about that for yourself to get them home safely? Do you have some means to defend you and them in the car? Do you lock the doors every time you get in? Do you wear seatbelts every time you get in? Do you have a way to survive if you go upside down and sideways in a ditch and your cell phone gets broken and you're, in the frozen tundra? I live in a state that's really cold. Phil lives in a state that's really cold. What do? Do you have a box of food in the back? A couple of blankets? Emergency sleeping bags, a way to start a fire, a way to signal, an alternate means to charge your cell phone? Do you have all of those things? So obviously that goes into what some people would call survival, but the defense of your life comes in various different stages, and it's not just about being able to fight someone off. It's also being able to protect yourself, and when you're in your vehicle, when you're at home, and when you're at work or the kids are at school, you need to have a plan for all of those areas. So that's what I plan on covering. I want to go into depth into those, and I want to talk about those things. Obviously, we're going to talk about things in our world that are changing. There's news events that are going to be happening. So each week when you tune in, folks, we'll have new lessons for you. We'll have quips about what we're seeing, and obviously we'll have snarky things that Phil wants to say.
Oh, sure. I'm the snarky one. Okay. I am. It's fair. It's fair.
You have anything to add to that before I wrap this up, Phil?
Just that too many people try to make this political. We're going to talk about things that will be of necessity political in nature, but they don't have to be. There's no reason that the defense of your life can't unite both sides of the aisle on any issue. The problem is that too often one side of the issue wants to put you in a place of helplessness, while the other side of the issue would prefer that not be the case. And I don't want this to be polarizing. There are going to be times when it is, and that's regrettable, but it's also reality.
Yeah, and I would tell you, I've done tons of female self-defense courses over the years. I've taught people from all walks of life when it comes to anything law enforcement related. The reality is this: whether you're a Democrat or a Republican or a libertarian or you're an atheist, wherever you come from in life, whatever race, religion, creed, we don't care, because self-defense is a given right to every human being on this planet. We want you to get something from this. We want you to learn something from this. And don't turn us off if you hear something that, that's, a little too, to the right or to the left for us. The reality is what you hear here could actually save your life. And if we help one person, my time here will be well spent.
Just so long as it isn't somebody I don't like.
All right, folks, until next time, if you see something, say something, please. And preferably do that while you're shooting back. And understand this, self-defense is your personal responsibility. Keep your head up, be aware of your surroundings, and be prepared to fight back. And have a plan for when something bad does happen. Thanks for joining us.
Check us out online and on audio. Links are in the description.
Was somebody just knocking on your door?
Yes.
Yeah.
One
go
sec.
ahead. Go deal with it. Yeah, we're good.